Okay, so welcome everyone. Part 3 of the 4 cups of personal breakthrough. So last week we really got into the four inner elements and we spoke about the struggle that happens within those 4 elements of ourselves. And we showed how when the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt, we showed how Egypt itself Egypt itself was an enslavement of the 4 elements. So it wasn't only a physical enslavement, which is connected to the earth element, which is connected to our bodies, but it was an emotional enslavement in the fact that we had to struggle. We showed how the earth element is the struggle between lustful pleasure and genuine love. And therefore, there was temptation within Egypt for the Jewish people to succumb to what was a very, very immoral place. So there was that struggle that was present in Egypt. We spoke about how the wind element is the struggle of the intellect, and therefore Egypt itself, which was a place that had that was a place of falsehood, a place that believed that they were gods, that messed up the correct understanding of things, and how they tried to manipulate the Jewish people to think according to the way they thought. And then we spoke about the fire element, which is the element of willpower, of self actualization. And the struggle within the fire element is the struggle of false self esteem, false self actualization that comes because of externals like wealth, money, possessions. Egypt was a place where the Nile flowed into it, and because of that, they made the false assumption that they were gods themselves. Pharaoh was a god himself. Egypt was a very, very rich country. And because of that, they allowed themselves to say, we're not dependent on God. We're gods ourselves. For the Jewish people, part of their time in Egypt was learning to reject that lifestyle and look for an authentic way for self-esteem, for self-actualization. So that's how we showed last week how the enslavement in Egypt was enslaving those 4 elements. And today, what we're going to focus on is showing how the process of redemption, which was a 4-stage process represented by the 4 terms of redemption. I will take you out, I will save you, I will redeem you, and I will take you to me. How those corresponded to the 4 different stages of the Exodus, which is why we drink 4 cups of wine. And we're going to show how each one of those stages corresponds to another one of the elements, and how the struggle that the Jewish people are going through within that stage of the redemption teaches us lessons about how we struggle with that element that's inside of us. Okay, so we have a tall order for today. We're not going to go through all 4 today, but at least we'll start, and hopefully we'll do the first 2 elements today and the second 2 elements next week. I hope that everything up until now is clear. If anyone has any questions at this point about last week's class or anything that I've said up until now, ask now. Let's make sure that we have clarity on these points before we move on. Yeah, Adrian. You're muted? Yeah.
I'm very thick. Okay. I'm not quite comprehending. And you've explained it before, but I still don't understand that the Jews were living, it wasn't an oppressive existence in Egypt when they decided to leave. Okay. Things went
Correct.
back to normal. And I still don't understand what was the impetus, if it came from a spiritual. That's not human nature. Human nature is, let's get out of here. You know, Berlin in Germany, I mean, in the 30s was pretty immoral, you know, so I don't know why I'm using that, but just in the early 30s, let's say.
Yeah.
So I don't understand who was telling them this, or it was organic or whatever, to leave a place where they weren't oppressed.
Good, good. So let's clarify. Let me clarify this. And again, I'm just not sure how, and therefore I want to make sure that you understand it. So I'm going to give a little bit more background to just the details of the story. The Jewish people, the night that they left, and it's good we're clarifying this now because we're going to go into the story a lot in today's class. The Jewish people were commanded on the beginning of the month of Nisan. They were told that on the 15th of Nisan, which is for us Passover night, that God was going to take them out. And the way that it would happen would be that there would be a final plague. The plague was the plague of the firstborn, which was clearly the divine hand. There was no rational explanation for that. It was God's hand. And on the 15th of Nisan, the Jewish people were having their Seder, the very first Seder of Jewish history, still in Egypt, no longer enslaved, but still trapped in Egypt, because they couldn't leave. They couldn't leave unless Pharaoh allowed them to leave. And God says that on that night, I'm going to hit the firstborn. And when I do that, they're going to kick you out of the land, and you're going to have to rush out of the land. Okay. So on the night of the 15th, on Passover night, God strikes the firstborn, and Pharaoh goes running to Moshe and tells Moshe that the Jewish people have to leave right then. And then at a very frantic pace, which we're going to discuss shortly, at a very frantic pace, the Jewish people all have to pick up and they have to leave. So it was God's decision for them to leave, God's commandment for them to leave. Interestingly enough, the Midrash says that there were many Jews that would not have left, and there were many Jews that were actually killed in the final plagues. The Jews were spared for most of the plagues. But towards the end, Jews were actually also dying during the plague, specifically during the plague of darkness, because the plague of darkness, the Egyptians couldn't see that the Jewish people were dying. But many of the Jews who said, why should we leave? We're comfortable here. We have our house. We have our 2 cars. We just invested a lot on landscaping and redoing the roof, and how are we going to bring all this into the desert? So we want to stay. And God says, okay, but that's not an option. So the Jewish people that left that night were actually a small number of Jewish people mixed together with others who were not part of the Jewish people. And God said, you have to leave. But it was taking them out of their comfort zone, whereas if they would have left while they were still in the middle of slavery, it would have been a no-brainer for them. Does that clarify things a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, good. Fantastic.
Cause and effect. That's all.
Yeah, and again, keep on asking. If anything is not clear, keep on asking. Okay. So let's take a look at our handout over here. Just to, once again, a quick review as to what these 4 stages were of the, it says over here, the 4 stages of slavery, but over here, what I mean is the 4 stages, not of slavery, but the 4 stages of the Exodus, the 4 stages of them going out. So stage 1, the stage that corresponds to Vahotsesi, I will take you out. That stage 1, begins when the actual slavery stops. They're still in Egypt, but the slavery has stopped. And it's that whole window of time until they leave Egypt. That's stage 1. And we're going to see that corresponds to the element of earth, as we're going to see shortly. Then there's stage 2. Stage 2 is when the people actually leave the country. That happens on Passover night, that happens on the 15th of Nisan, where after the plague of firstborn, they're sitting there, they're having their Seder, they're enjoying their time, they're eating from the Korban Pesach, the sacrifice known as the Paschal Lamb. They're sitting there having a Seder with their families, they're eating matzah, they're eating maror, and the plague of firstborn happens, and then Pharaoh comes running and says, get out of Egypt. And that's when they actually leave Egypt. And they find after they leave Egypt, God is going to bring them not in a very direct route. They think they're on the way towards Israel, but God is going to bring them in an indirect route. They're going to find themselves standing at the Sea of Reeds, and about a week later, they're going to have a very close encounter because the Egyptians are going to chase after them and are going to be very close to catching up to them while they're standing at the banks of the Sea of Reeds. So the second section of redemption, of I will save you from their servitude, begins when they actually leave Egypt, until that point that they're standing on the banks of the Sea of Reeds, known in the Torah as the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. Stage 3, now we begin stage 3, which is Viga'alti. At that point, stage 3, now the Jewish people start to experience the miracles, all of the miracles that we're so familiar, that hopefully we'll speak about at our Seder night. The sea splits for them, and then on the other side, they receive the manna as food. They get a miraculous well of water. They have to face a war against Amalek, and they win that war, even though they're undermanned. So they face all sorts of amazing miracles that happen. That's stage number 3. That's called Viga'alti. I will redeem you. And then the final stage of redemption, the 4th stage, Vilakachti, I will take you to me as a people. That's what happens when the Jewish people are standing there to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. And again, stage 3 is going to respond to the element of wind, and stage 4 is going to correspond to the element of fire. Let's take a look and let's try to bring this down and make this very, very practical and share the lessons that this has to teach us. And these are things that you can share at your Seder and inspire your family. Okay, over here in chart number 5, this is what we spoke about last week, and this was the 4 elements that they were struggling with in Egypt. But now, again, this is chart number 6. We're not going to get into. It's a little bit beyond the time that we have, but you can take a look, and this shows how Egypt, the 4 elements, the slavery of the 4 elements in Egypt, how it connects to early on in the Torah, the 4 early sins of the early generations of humanity. That's in the beginning of the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis. But here's what I want to talk about tonight. Each stage and how they correspond to the elements. So, as we said, the first stage, the people, the Jewish people, they're still in Egypt. The actual bondage, the actual slavery has stopped. And as we pointed out, at that point, things are okay. Theoretically, the Jewish people, as long as there's no genocide going on, as long as they're not trying to kill us, we could stay and probably get pretty comfortable again. We were comfortable in Egypt before the slavery started, and we can get comfortable again afterwards. Egypt was a very nice country to live in. Right, it was very, it was not a third world country of those days. It was a wealthy country, and the Jewish people, we had our own little neighborhoods. We probably had a good kosher supermarket, maybe a couple of shuls, and we can come home every single night and binge watch Netflix, and be very, very happy there. To the point that, Adrian, you were asking, okay, so then what really propelled them? Why did they have to leave? And that is the mentality. Because that would be the mentality of most Jews in America today. If we were to say, okay, we don't belong here, we say, well, what do you mean we don't belong here? Things are nice, right? We live in a country that has been nicer to us than any country that has ever been in the history of humanity. And we're comfortable, and we have our stuff, and we have the ability, if we want, to serve God over here. We're free, freedom of religion. Yeah, there's a little anti-Semitism, whatever, sweep it under the carpet, make a post on Facebook, and continue, and life will go on. There's no real compelling reason for us to leave. It's easier to stay. When life is good, it's easy to stay where you are. Right? Assuming that your relationship is okay. Is it great? It's not great, but it's okay. Your job, do you love your job? I don't love it, but it's okay. So when things are okay, it's easy to stay where you are and say, you know what? Just staying put. Things are not great, but let me just stay where I am. It's easier to stay than to have to take a chance, than have to get moving. That is the element of earth speaking. The element of earth, as we know, earth is about form and stability. And there is a part of us, all of these elements could be used the right way. There is a part of us that wants stability. We don't want to take risks. Risks are scary. We want to stay where we are if where we are is comfortable. So therefore, this time period between when the slavery stopped, when the Jewish people had to leave, this is really where the earth element comes into play. One of the things that have become the trademark of Passover, it's why we eat matzah, right? What is the difference between matzah and chametz? A couple of seconds, right? Matzah has to be made very quickly. It's got to be there. It cannot rise for more than 18 minutes. If it rises for 19 minutes, it's chametz. And because of that, have you ever been to a matzah bakery? Everything is happening at a matzah bakery at a frantic pace. People are running around. It's chaotic. They're running here. They're running there. Everyone's right. They're running. They're moving. They're hustling. It's always funny when you think about this whole idea of like the Jewish people, why do we eat matzah? We eat matzah because the Jewish people had to leave in a hurry and they did not have time to bake their dough. They were in Egypt for 210 years. Right? They had 2 weeks notice that they were leaving Egypt. I know for me, right, if you told me now that in a week from now I was leaving, I'd already be popping the pizza bagels into the oven now, like we're going on a road trip, make sure the kids have enough food, right? They're Jews. They're thinking about food ahead of time. You think they're baking bread at midnight on the 15th of Nisan? Clearly, the Torah is creating for us a story, a bizarre story, because it wants us to hone in on the nature of matzah versus chametz, and that is speed. The Jewish people are leaving at a frantic pace. Chametz is dough that rises. It just sits around on the kitchen counter and it just fattens itself up. It's not moving anywhere. Matzah's on the move. The Jewish people leave Egypt in a hurry after 210 years. Let's take our time. Let's pack the car. No. You got to get out. We're running out. Pharaoh was chasing us out in a frantic pace. So I'm reading this book now. Maybe some of you have read it. I'm dabbling in it amongst the bazillion other books that I'm reading. Sometimes the books just come, crashing in. Nancy, by the way, I finished the book, The Four Agreements. I enjoyed it a lot. It was really wonderful. So one of the many books that I'm in the middle of is called The 5-Second Rule. Anyone ever read that book? 5-Second Rule. It's by a woman named Mel Robbins, not related to Tony. And the 5-second rule, which again, for me growing up, the 5-second rule was always if you accidentally drop food on the floor and you don't want to waste it and you pick it up within 5 seconds, you can still eat it. But her 5-second rule is a little bit different. Her 5-second rule is that when you know that you have to do something, when you know the next action that you have to take, you have about 5 seconds to act upon it before the resistance in your brain starts coming in strong. Before all of the excuses start flowing into your head, saying why you shouldn't do it and why it's not a good idea. So therefore, she says that anytime that you know that there's something that you have to do, you should actually count yourself down like a rocket ship. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then just do it. Just do it. Just get out of bed. Just shut down your social media because you have to get on to the next thing. Just send that email. Just pick up the phone and dial. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Count yourself in and do it. Build up that momentum because that's really going to jumpstart your brain to kick in before the resistance comes in. So therefore, one could see something very, very fascinating. Stage 1 that corresponds to the element of earth. The element of earth is like chametz. It just wants to sit there. It doesn't want to move. It doesn't want to take action. And matzah, the leaving Egypt in a hurry, that is the answer. That's the answer to the earth element. If we're trying to overcome the earth element that's inside of us, the answer is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get up and move. Take action. We should be able to look at the end of the day, back at our day, and every single day say, I did one thing. I took action in one way to move my life out of my comfort zone into the next level, into what greatness looks like. Another aspect that we see, besides for the mitzvah of matzah, there was another mitzvah that was given to them, and that is the mitzvah of sanctifying the new month. Sanctifying the new month. Sanctifying the new month is something we're not going to get into the whole thing now because it would just take too long, but this was actually the very first mitzvah that was given to them as a nation. And that is that even though now we have a very set calendar, right? So therefore 1 month goes to the next month because that's what the calendar says that it should do. But in in temple times, it didn't work like that. In temple times, for 1 month to move into the second month, Beit Din, the courts actually had to declare it based on seeing the new moon. And they would actually say the words Mikudash. The new month has been sanctified. And when they would say the new month is sanctified, that would begin the new month. Okay, we don't have that anymore because we don't have a temple. We don't have an official court like we did back then. But that's the way time worked. There was this idea of sanctifying time. The earth element is the root, as we said, of sluggishness, of laziness. And a lazy person does not sanctify their time. A lazy person thinks that they take time for granted. I'll always have tomorrow. There's no difference between today or tomorrow, yesterday. All time just weaves together into one. The idea, this commandment of sanctifying the new month is again speaking to the earth element and saying, no, if you want to be free, up until now, you had a master telling you what to do. The earth element was enslaved. You had a master saying, this is what time you're going to get up. This is the job they're going to do. This is the time you're going to go to sleep. So therefore, being lazy was irrelevant, but now you're free. And now you need to learn to be your own master. You need to learn that time is going to be holy and that you have to tap into the power of time. So these two mitzvot that the Jewish people are given, the mitzvah of matzah and the mitzvah of sanctifying the new month, both of them speak directly to the earth element. And both of them teach us lessons how to elevate our earth element, our feeling of laziness, our feeling of insecurity. And that is number one, sanctify time every single day. Today, I have a mission today that wasn't there yesterday and it's not going to be there tomorrow. Today is holy and I need to sanctify it. And the second one, the message of matzah is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, take action. Don't just sit around. Don't let the chametz rise. Don't let the earth element kick in. That is an insight into stage 1 of the redemption. Any questions on this?
I have a question. Yeah. I was wondering that you said they were eating matzah at the first Seder.
Yes.
Before they left.
Yes.
So what was that about?
That is that is a very, very profound point that we forget about at the Seder. The Seder introduces us to matzah in a very, very interesting way. Over the course of the Seder, we have different reasons why we eat matzah. The beginning of the Seder, we say this is the poor man's bread that they ate in Egypt. Towards the end of the Seder, we say this is the bread that they ate because they didn't have time for the dough to rise. But the truth is that they were eating matzah already in Egypt. The reason behind that is that we do not eat any food, just like we don't celebrate any holidays, purely for a commemorative reason. Events happen that bring out the essence of a mitzvah. The reason why we eat matzah is because matzah teaches us a lesson about our lives. The reason that the Jewish people went out in a way that they didn't have time for their dough to rise was to teach us through a narrative, through the story, the lesson of matzah. Maybe they didn't fully understand when they were eating the night before they went out. Maybe they didn't fully understand the message of matzah. But then when we see the story of the Jewish people, they're leaving, they don't have time, they don't have time for it to bake, and then matzah comes. Now matzah will always be interconnected with this idea of rushing, of moving, of having to leave. Now we understand matzah. But the reason why we eat matzah is because of the holiness and the message of matzah, which is something that's much bigger than just an event that happened 3,000 years ago. Right? Our job is to live with the message of matzah. Live like a matzah.
So they were eating matzah without understanding why.
Oh, I
They were
mean,
eating at
again,
that first Seder.
I don't know whether they understood or whether they didn't understand, but they didn't have yet the story associated with it. But the mitzvah itself had an inherent meaning to it. And they probably did know it. It would be wrong to say that they didn't understand why they were eating it. But the story that happened afterwards was really just a narrative to reveal the inner essence of matzah, which was a mitzvah that existed even before the event actually happened.
Okay.
All right. So that is stage one. That is the first element. Okay, good. So now we move on to stage number 2. That is the stage of Vihitzalti. We said that water, the water element, the struggle that happens on the water element is the struggle between lust versus love, between taking the element that's inside of us that looks for a life of pleasure and of enjoyment and teaches us that this is not there for us to indulge in our own hedonistic pleasures, but that it's there for us to refine. And over here, it's no coincidence that when the Jewish people leave Egypt during the second phase, where do they find themselves encamping? In front of the water. And so God is actually putting into the story the water element to really bring out the point. Right? The next great moment in this Jewish story is going to happen with water because it's connected to the water element. So literally the visual is right there for us. But there's something else that we need to understand about the scene. Because they have the water on one side, because they're there at the phase of water element. But what do they have on the other side? In the beginning of Parshat Bishalach, it says that God did not take them straight, but God had them encircle the desert, and they found themselves opposite the sea, in front of an idol, and the idol was, the place was called Piachiros, and the idol, I believe, was called Baal Tzifon. I don't remember exactly what it is. What exactly what it's called, but I think that's what it was called. And over there, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi, who's citing the Midrash, Rashi tells us, gives us a little bit of insight about this idol that God parked them in front of. This was an idol, again, right outside of Egypt, or on the outskirts of Egypt. And this was an idol which the way it looked was it was made up of 2 rocks. Anyone here ever been to one of the Utah parks, Arches, or right? So sometimes you see these rock formations, right, that look almost like, you can imagine, like they look like people, they look like human beings, like they have one right when you come in. I think they call it the 3 sages. I call it the 3 Hasidim. I thought of that, by the way, before I knew that they called it 3 sages, because it looks like 3 wise men standing up on a mountain. So the formation of the rocks over here were such that they looked like a male and female who were, courting each other, who were, trying to come close to one another. Let's just say there was some innuendo in this formation of rocks. And because of that, the Egyptians treated this place and they treated this idol to go to their place to, have their immoral parties, to have their orgies. And that's where God tells the Jewish people when they're leaving Egypt, God says, this is going to be the scene. On the one hand, you're going to have this idol. On the other side, you're going to have the Sea of Reeds. And you're going to have the Egyptians chasing after you. And at this point, there's going to be a message for the Jewish people to internalize. Why would it be that at this point, why would God play this trick on them? Well, it's like a joke. Like, you're sitting there, you're leaving, you're trying to go to a place of holiness, and literally, it would be the equivalent of, like you're on the way to shul on Yom Kippur, and you stop at a traffic light, and it happens to be, right next to, like a nightclub or something like that. And everyone's hanging out outside. It's like you're on your way to Yom Kippur, and that's what you have to see. That's really where God wants to place them when they're coming out of Egypt. And the answer is, this is the second stage of redemption. This is the stage where the Jewish people need to realize that this is going to be a struggle of the water element. What do you think freedom is like? Is freedom just going to be a big party? Or are you going to throw off the yoke of your holiness and say, okay, we're free now. Let's party the way we want? Or are we going to realize that no, we're not free to be free to engage in debauchery? We're free because we're meant to be holy. They had to turn their backs on this idol as a way of saying we're turning our backs on the immorality of Egypt to try to elevate ourselves, which is going to happen as soon as they jump into the sea. You know, one of the things about the water element and about all lust and desire for pleasure, God orchestrates things that the Egyptians chase after the Jewish people. Because in a way, our life is somewhat of a cat and mouse game where we all have our, sort of guilty pleasures. It could be, for men and women, it's different, but for different human beings, it's different. And for some people, it might be, fancy, cars or fancy homes. For other people, it could be fancy clothing. It could be shopping. It could be eating. It could be, whatever, insert your hedonistic pleasure here, right? Whatever it is. And often we become so addicted to it and we want to get away. We genuinely want to get away, but yet it chases after us. Based on the recommendation of Richard, I bought the book God of Our Understanding, right, which is it's a powerful, very, very powerful book. And he say in the beginning of I'm still at the beginning of the book. But one of the things that he speaks about, which is so fascinating, is he says that those who are addicted to anything, whatever the addiction is, he says it's so hard to pin down what it is because it's not physiological. Because there are times that they'll go for, they'll already have it out of their system. It can't just be a chemical imbalance because people will relapse after years. So what is it? Is it a craving? Well, it can't be a craving either because people see that it's hurting them. It's hurting their life. They don't even want it. They want to run away from it, and yet it chases them. So what is it? And Rabbi Shais Taub, who's the author of the book, he gives a little bit of the background behind the 12-step program. And he says that the way the 12-step program originated, everyone's familiar with the 12-step program, all the anonymous groups use it. He says the way that it originated was that the founder of it, Bill Wilson, so he had a friend who had another friend who went for counseling, who's an addict, and he went to counseling with Carl Jung, Dr. Carl Jung, the world-renowned psychiatrist. And Carl Jung said, I rarely ever see people who are so addicted, I rarely ever see them recover. But the one thing, where it seldom happens, but when it happens, it usually happens because of a powerful spiritual experience. And the person who went for counseling took that to heart, and he went to seek out powerful spiritual experiences, and he told it to his friend, who eventually told it to Bill Wilson, who created this system. And we know that that entire system of recovery is a system of saying, God, I am no longer in control. I am putting myself into your hands. I'm just throwing myself upon you. Help me. I can't do this alone. I cannot do this alone. And it's that spiritual experience, it's that yearning, that craving for spirituality, that ability to relinquish oneself and say, God, I'm giving myself over to you. That's what's going to save them from this addiction that's pursuing them. What a beautiful, beautiful insight into this moment where the Jewish people are standing there. Where are they standing? At the water, because this struggle is connected to the water element. And on the one side of them, they have the addiction. That's this idol. That's this balsaphone that represents immorality, that represents debauchery, that represents what they're trying to get away from. We have the Egyptians chasing them. The same way that any addiction or any habit that we're trying to kick always seems like no matter how far we feel that we've gotten, it's chasing after us. And then we have the water on the other side. And Moshe looks up to God and he starts to pray, and God says, don't pray right now. Jump into the sea, because you're going to have the greatest spiritual experience. Because it's only that spiritual experience that can save you right now from the addiction. It's only when you give yourself over to this higher power, it's only when you go into the sea and say, God, I got nothing left besides for you, and that's all I want. And then eventually when they go into the sea, they're going to have that they're going to enter into the next stage. But that was their struggle. That was their challenge. That was the challenge of water that they had to overcome. Okay, so we've covered the first two stages. We said a lot, and I'll pause if anyone has any questions. But again, just to reiterate, I just want to show again, we have now the first two stages that correspond to the earth and water element. The earth element, which is one of stability, not taking action. What's given to them at that stage is the mitzvah of sanctifying the new month, sanctifying time, all time is holy, and matzah, which is the responsibility, the tool of taking action by just saying, by moving 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's go. And then the second stage that corresponds to water finds them there at the Sea of Reeds, being chased by the Egyptians in front of the idol that represents immorality. And their job is to realize that they are powerless to overcome without giving themselves over to a higher power and eventually jumping into the water. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.